Today, I won't start with a welcome or a hi or a thank you or something. Today, I want to start with a quote. And that quote goes, it's not you versus me or her versus him, but it's us versus the problem. My name is Joel Aftendatten, and I'm from the International Students Committee. I had the pleasure to organize this whole event. We're a student of 24, and I'm very, very happy to see this all coming together now and to have this here. I first was responsible for the Swiss market, and then afterwards for transportation. So everybody who took a car up here, that was on me. And outside of the symposium, I'm a student here. I'm an undergraduate. I'm in my BA now, fourth semester, and I don't want to skip the happy part. So thank you all for being here. Like it's a pleasure to see this all coming together. It's amazing also to have speakers on the stage here, and then like just to see it all happening now. So thank you all for giving me your time and for being here, and also giving them the time and just listening to this important topic. And that gets me to the next point. Every year we have a topic. This year's topic is confronting scarcities. And with scarcities, I always was talking with the people at the meetings with for the Swiss market. For some of you, I see some in the audience that I had a meeting with. And we were talking about scarcities and what scarcities are and like what scarcities are important. Most of the time, the first word I heard was the labor force shortage. But I think there's something we're missing, or like in the world we are living in, another basic need. And according to Maslow, the basic needs are most important, and one of them is water. You can see it right here on every table, water. He already poured himself some water. He's pouring himself water right now. It's the basic need we have. Everybody needs water. We won't survive with it. So today I wanna ask the burning question of how do we handle this limited resource that seems to us so unlimited? I now wanna give the word over, after I introduce everybody, to Gerald Butts. We also have here Zoran Bogdanović, Stefan Schaible. Now don't hang me up here, but Mustika Wijaya. Perfect. And Antonia Carrillo. Again, it's us versus the problem. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. And just before we get started, I know we've congratulated them already, but I'm amazed at the ingenuity and work ethic of the students that go into putting this conference together. So I just want to give them a round of applause to start off as well.
Bravo.
So just to set a few ground rules, we're going to have a conversation. I hope it'll be a free-flowing one here for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to take any questions you have for the next 20 minutes. But in order to get the discussion going, I wanted to give each of the panelists an opportunity to talk a little bit about themselves and to give an opening statement on the topic. So you have the benefit of sitting next to me, Zoran, so you get to go first.
Thank you, Gerald. So for us who are in the food and beverage industry, and particularly in beverage industry, without water, literally, there is nothing. So we treat water as genuinely very precious, finite resource. And every year on a quest to see, how we reduce it in our processes, and more importantly, especially in the targeted areas that are water risk areas, how do we ensure that communities do have water? I'm encouraged and very inspired by various partnerships, which always prove that only through partnerships so many things can happen. And there is a growing number of those together with innovation, and I'm very optimistic that jointly, as Joe said, all of us together, there is so much that we can do, and that we can provide better conditions for many people who unfortunately cannot enjoy the comfort and easiness that we have with availability of water in quantity, but also in the quality. So we are very committed, and me personally through my role in really pushing this agenda.
Thank you. Stefan?
So my name is Stefan Schaible. I'm the CEO of Roland Berger. So coming from a consultancy, I think from a global perspective, the water topic is one of the key topics for the next decades. It's to be a little cynical, if you burn down the planet, water will be a limited resource. And just to make that clear, if you take the impact of climate change, 70% of the problems are linked via the water cycle. So it's either droughts, it's floods, it's storms, it's all that summed up, a significant impact. And half of the population in the world is affected by water shortages, at least partially over the year. And this will not get better with climate change increasing and population increasing. From a business consultant perspective, 15 years ago, I would have said this is not a key topic in consulting, but it has become a key topic. And for large investments in industry to build a new production site, if we have a look at cement industry or power generation entities, it's anyhow something that is a key element. So we really do for companies not a commitment to reduce water usage for 20%. We really do strategies how to secure for the next decades your water supplies and where to go, what to do. So it's a pretty strategic topic. And what we did in our internal M&A strategy is doing investment as Roland Berger. We bought a water company with an US, Middle East, UK and French footprint and are significantly accelerating that business. So that's why I'm also pleased to sit on that podium and to give some insight or to answer some question or to get some critical feedback, however. Yeah.
Terrific, thank you. Mustika.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mustika Wijaya. I'm from Indonesia. I found a nonprofit organization and also lead the nonprofit organization called Solar Chapter. So I think for us, the water is hand-rich, but for the community that I work with, it's 2-3 hours away from their homes. And climate change even make things even worse. So our solution is we built a solar-powered pump with a community-led system to the rural communities of Indonesia. So now the water is maximum 3 minutes away from their homes.
It's amazing. Antonio?
Holcim is a building material company. I think you mentioned, Stefan, about cement. This building where we're sitting is actually made out of a recycled concrete. And our industry, the company is normally at the spotlight in the areas of climate and circularity. That's been the most material topics, but the fact is that we also consume water. We consume water to produce this societal need material as concrete, this super glue. But we also consume water when it comes to actually use the product. So there's water that got sequestered in that column, and it will not leave that column. So some visionary colleagues that we have in the audience led the nature strategy at Holcim a couple of years ago. We were pioneers in setting up water reduction targets for our operation. So we determined to reduce the water that we consume and the fresh water that we extract from the streams, as well as to replenish as much as possible in the communities where we operate. So, as you were saying, a couple of years ago, this was not a topic. Nevertheless, we wanted to be at the forefront, and now we're benefiting a little bit from these first movers. Suddenly, we have frameworks that's TNFD, SBTN, and we're working with all these organizations thanks to the work we did with the team a couple of years ago.
I can't help but notice that almost everybody mentioned climate change when we talk about water. And give you a sense of my background on the issue. I'm vice chairman of Eurasia Group, joined 5 years ago to build the sustainability and energy transition risk practice. But before that, I ran the Prime Minister's office in Canada. Before that, I was CEO of the World Wildlife Fund, and I'm on the board of the World Wildlife Fund in the United States. And I feel like I should give a spiritual hello to Andre Hoffman, who's usually here with us, but can't be this year. I find the comparison between the way we as a species have dealt with climate and the way we're beginning to deal with water to be a very rich one. And ideally, you would think that we would have learned from the slow pace at which we've grappled with climate change and applied those lessons to how we're beginning to deal with water and broader biodiversity issues. What have we learned? Stefan, you've been in the middle of this for a very long time. What have we learned from climate change that we can apply to water?
The
small question for you.
The lesson in the end is that it starts to get moving also on the industry side, but I think we are not quick enough in the climate change topic. I think everybody will agree. Perhaps with the water thing, it's at least as difficult as with the climate change thing, because the path towards renewables or zero carbon production via nuclear is a clear one to go in that direction. With the water, you cannot change it on short notice. So you can drill deeper, and to get the water from deeper things, it will then reduce your groundwater level. And you can do a lot in reusing. We still have fundamental efficiency gains in having not as many leakages in our water systems and whatever. So there are some things to do, but it's very clear to have a look in direction of Spain, whatever. So I think nobody will really be able to avoid that agriculture production in some southern parts. Either there's nothing to drink for population, or you have to find other recipes. So I think, and so it's really to go forward looking. I think from the urgency thing, perhaps to be also a little cynical, to have nothing to drink is even worse than that it gets hotter every year. So the pressure from population on political people or whatever, and imagine in France, who had said that 15 years ago, there are droughts that create significant problem in the countries. In some parts of Germany, where all the thought water is free and nothing happens, I think that, to be a little think pink, will via the pressure from so many people affected that can defend themselves, also meaning in the developed countries, this might bring the topic much quicker and stronger on the agenda than some people believe still now.
Yeah, sorry, were you going to jump in on that, Zoran?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that three connected points. One is that on a local level, one thing is a reminder, especially over the last several years, where we see such a big variations in the weather, from crazy fires to crazy floods in unusual types of the year. On top of that, building infrastructure and doing more. But then this also connects with the fact that what drives climate change, that water is also connected with the issue of the emissions.
Right.
Which is a broader topic than just water, but there is so much to be done. And but I think that a number of us that concretely are doing evidently and tangibly every year more, you sometimes feel like you are running in the same place, which is a reminder that no single company, no single industry, no single country can solve this problem. Mm-hmm. It's much wider. And somehow there is a lot of talk, but I don't think that there is yet globally sufficient committed action to really tackle that. Yeah. I mean, the other day, reminder, the last few weeks, you see here yellow cars because of the sand from Africa. Yeah. So, I mean, you can't contain and say this is Swiss air only. Right. Things are moving. So we really depend on really making this alliance broader and more concrete and committed.
Yeah, and the point that you're both making, you often hear people talk about a post-carbon economy, but there's no such thing as a post-water economy. And we should be redoubling our urgency. Mustika, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think for climate change, right? How does it affect our communities in the local level? So 93% of our community rely 100% on the climate because they are rain-fed farmers. So in 2019, 300 days without rain, and even today, because of the El Nino, it's flooding everywhere. So they cannot plan during dry season, not even rainy season, right? So climate change is about food crisis too in the future. And the communities that I work with is living what it's like if climate change and water crisis will be, right? So, and then also there's another stories a little bit that in Sumba Island, in the place that I work, the water resources is drying up because tourism came. People dig wells, they are building pools and stuff like that. So the water resource that we already put the pump is drying up very bad. And thinking about, like, I was thinking dig deeper, right? So companies can always dig deeper, but the communities might not have money to dig deeper. So I was thinking, like, how should we, as a, over here, maybe all the businesses and as a government, we should take accountable of the water usage that we have. Definitely the one that we take to the ground because we take from somebody else.
Yeah. Antonio, you see Holcim has been involved in the entire alphabet soup of climate initiatives, right? You have been a leader in this for a long time. Do you see anything commensurate developing on water, or is it just every company on their own these days?
I guess the challenge that water and biodiversity, nature in general, has compared to climate is that climate has been benefiting from a greenhouse gas protocol that was started in the 90s. So it's a couple of decades ahead of the topic. And but I think at the same time, that is actually the beauty and where you can learn on how to measure and to manage climate into water. I think there's no question today that any company has to report a greenhouse gas inventory for scope 1, 2, and 3. Do we have the same requirements for water consumption? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
Well, I guess there is a number of aspects. First of all, is you have ESG frameworks that have basically eventually led to regulation and pool of demand. So investors, finance community are using them as a reference. And they've been there forever, in the sense that Science-Based Target Initiative, TCFD, when it comes to talk about the climate disclosures, risks and opportunities, these are frameworks that are existing for at least a decade or so. Probably having more traction over the last 5 years. But now we see, I mean, we have a tagline in our company when it comes to pitch to the middle managers, is because it's not always that prominent, is that nature is the new climate. Everything that is happening, or that has happened in climate with all these frameworks and that eventually led to requirements for companies to disclose and to manage, is happening now for nature. Mm-hmm. You have TNFD with nature-related disclosures, come a little bit out of the blue, that has now imposed a number of requirements to companies to disclose on this topic. Water, easier to manage than biodiversity, the same with SBTN, or Science-Based Target for Nature. It's all happening. So I guess the benefit of having basically paved the way for a couple of years with climate, all these frameworks should benefit from the do's and don'ts of all those key learnings.
Yeah, well, most of the people on this stage have been involved in that paving project, and it's been a very painful one indeed. But we have made a lot of progress, and I'm not sure how much publicity it got in Europe, but the Montreal COP on nature was a major step forward on biodiversity, and that's kind of warms my panda heart to hear what you're saying there, Antonio. You work with a lot of companies across a lot of sectors. How would you assess, without naming names, the level of awareness and progress on water vis-a-vis climate?
It's point one, how strongly you're affected in your business. Then there's always the openness, let's say, of the management and the positioning of the company. We do quite some consulting in agriculture, and this is a fundamentally impacted sector where you just in certain regions can't secure food security. If you go for water short countries like in Northern Africa and Middle East, it gets very practical, not only to depend on on imported things. Then you have the usual suspects, let's say, on the industrial side, where it's obvious energy producing companies like you in the cement industry, but also pretty surprising, for example, appearance textiles are a strong consumer of water where you have to have a look. And even if we take chip factories in Phoenix, Arizona, where you have significant problems, or if you take Tesla in Grünheide in Germany, it gets a point where it's more and more relevant. So I'm not talking about you who sell water as a key element of your drinks, and we have some regions in the world where you prefer Coke just for quality of water topics to drinking normal water. So then it gets then a very interesting spot. So it's all over that chain, and as I said, it's not. It starts to take off that you have the two segments ready for producing industries, designing a sustainable water, let's say, concept that might stay for 20, 30 years. That's point one. And point two, if the water levels always go lower, the quality of drinking water is significantly endangered. And we shouldn't talk too much about it, but some very large cities in Europe and all over the world have a significant quality problem. And that gets also for strategy consultants a topic what was not really the case 20 years ago. So
it's interesting to me that climate, which is, carbon dioxide is a well-mixed gas, so it doesn't really matter where you emit carbon. It's everybody's common problem. Whereas water can be really, it can have local effects that have local causes. And I wonder, speaking from the perspective of someone who's trying to build a social purpose business in a deleteriously affected area from water shortages, what kind of help do you need from larger orders of government, for instance? Like, what is going to solve the problem in a small question for you, Mustika? What is going to solve the problem in remote communities about water quality and availability?
Right. So I'm only talking about the village level, right? So several contributions to why this keep happening. One is like political conflict, mismanagement and corruption within the water committee, and also like social jealousy. So it's really important for the communities, like where the public faucet is located. That's really important. That can create social jealousy. But I think the most important part is the system itself. So there's a lot of lack. There is lack of monitoring and capacity building effort of the water systems. So if there is lack of monitoring and capacity building effort, there's gonna be a lot of abandoned pumps. So in Sumba, for example, that I work with, 80% of the pump that is built after 1 year, it's abandoned. So no one really monitor, no one really built anymore, right? And then because of the abandoned pump, there is a lack of trust within the funders and the government, and blaming the communities. Oh, the communities doesn't know how to do this, right? And stuff like that. And then because of that, then there's not a lot of money again to actually build a quality program. So I think it's a vicious cycles in the funders area. How do we fund our water programs is really important. It's not only about implementation and then taking picture and then go, but the monitoring and the capacity building effort is really important. So I think we should change the key performance indicator of the government and also CSR on building in these local communities. So it's not only how many people that you impacted, right? So how many water produced every day to the local communities that you serve? Because we cannot, we need to take accountable on like people that build the water systems.
Yeah, so I won't direct this to anyone in particular, but I hope one of you will answer it, or maybe all of you. I think you've all mentioned, and you just did, Mustika, that this is fundamentally an infrastructure problem. So how do we create different modes of infrastructure that build water delivery systems in the collective interest when it's normally, pretty vulnerable people that are affected by bad outcomes?
I don't think it's only an infrastructure problem. I think the infrastructure definitely will will help a lot, especially for those particular cases in communities. We used to operate in India, and we learned a lot about water management from that community because of the scarcity. But I think it's also about awareness and policies. For us, we have an holistic target that is cascaded down to all the operations, but it's not the same to treat the topic of water scarcity in Switzerland than, for example, in the south of Spain, where I'm from. It is not the same. It is not the same need. It is not the same materiality in terms of the risk of a business. Or so I guess these small steps of transparency, asking for it, and simple actions. You can have twofold, right? As companies be more progressive, setting targets ahead of the pack, and ideally also integrating those targets in the compensation scheme. No? If you're managing of a company and you not only need to provide an EBIT, but also a fresh water reduction at the end of the year, you have it in the radar. That's for sure. And the other one is this has to be also coming from the policies. Sometimes what we were discussing before, just basic transparency needs are not in place. So you could basically run a business without having the understanding of how much water you're consuming or what is the impact you're having. So basic standardization of this topic would definitely help as well.
So what do you guys think of that performance pay for executives of companies based on water management?
Yeah, first I'll come back to that. I would build on the fact that equally having, as we do, science-based targets and transparency on climate and water with CDP, A rating. But where this comes to life, when you really see communities, and you asked about question about company awareness, when you have in pool of our scope country like Nigeria,
right,
where you really see people who don't have water barely for drinking or no sanitation, hygiene, and then putting infrastructure and completely changing life on a basic level, plus for food creation with irrigation systems. So this is where I personally I get very inspired and committed when you really see how it changes a life. It can be like recently in Maiduguri, 14,000 people, but 4 years ago in Chalava, it was 1 million people with 3.5 million investment. But we do have incentivization on the CO2 emissions. Now, we are global beverage leader on Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We simply couldn't achieve that that's so complex and widespread criteria that every year you have to raise the bar, and water is part of that. Otherwise, you simply don't get there, and rightly so. I mean, the criteria has to keep going up. But we have done incentivization on sustainability metric, which we felt that CO2 emissions encompass so many things. So that one is part of our incentives based on which we do or do not get paid.
Stefan?
So I shift a little away from the KPI things and the motivation things, just to have a look in an investment perspective. I see there is an interesting divide actually in private equity and financing things, that what I never would have believed, there are the strong believers in that these industries develop, and the other ones are still financing, let's say, industries like oil and gas, where you discuss how long they'll stay. And so if you take the business perspectives and also strategy projects we do for emerging markets in Africa or also some parts of Asia, I do not know about your island where you talk from, but there's really reasonable attempts with all the jungle of corruption in some African countries, whatever, to go for water systems down there and to invest in the infrastructure, where they all had been very careful. So at least there are some positive signal, and it's also, if you take, let's say, operating models to invest in water infrastructure also in low wage or poor regions, that can pay off. Yeah? And if you then would go for, let's say, a globalized world where alliances also with African countries to go like China did in digitization, Europe might invest in water, or other powers might invest in that segment. That might be a political thing that at least can be seen. So we discuss markets where I even have, with water clients, where I have to overrule my compliance officer because they say don't do business in these countries. But the clients are so hungry to do some business, so that's an interesting I hadn't, and water is one of the few topics where that takes place.
I'm conscious that we're in Switzerland, and I don't want to screw up the timing, but I think I'm in the only room in this country without a clock.
Zoran has.
So I'm going to rely on my watch, which says
correct.
5:04. So that
Yes,
means
correct.
we've got about 10 minutes left, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. Pace of change. How do we accelerate it? This one's open for anybody.
I mentioned partnerships. I genuinely think that connecting companies that are in the value chain, in our case, the way we push the partnership with our suppliers beyond transactional, innovating, trying to innovate jointly with a number of them, even from technical producers like Krones and similar. They also learn that having us earlier in the conversation, what they are thinking about, sharing earlier with NDAs, even prototypes they have, really gives them valuable feedback. And I see that that's today different than was 10 years ago. Equally, us, what we do with customers, we do the same. So I really think that connecting and smoother and faster working with companies in the whole value chain, I see that it really makes the
voluntary associations in the private sector that come together.
I meant first of all in the business sector, but then also how today really you have to work with local authorities, because sometimes even if when you want to do some things locally, if there are, you wouldn't believe it, even sometimes political conflicts because of the how to get permit, they don't want to get permit because elections are coming up. All kinds of things can happen.
Oh yeah.
So I really think partnering on a wide front. I really think that and more transparency and more investment.
Antonio, you're an engineer. You're a problem solver. How do we solve this one?
Partnership is a good one. We have a strong partnership with IUCN that is helping us to accelerate a lot of these practices and also learn from the experts on how to apply them. Right, it's mainly on biodiversity, where the whole topic of measurement is not that well established. But not to repeat him because it's been already said. I would say leadership and effective incentives. Leadership in the sense, I think we were touching base before. What happened a little bit in our industry, we set these innovative targets a few years back, and we can see today as most of our competitors are having similar targets and disclosing the same metrics. So created a little bit of a competition that is, I think, is sane. No, so being the first mover has a bit of a price in terms of the effort, but you could actually move the needle. And what we were discussing before, right? Having effective incentives that actually potentially starting with just basic transparency can basically raise awareness of the impacts, both on the positive side when you were referring to support on communities, but also on minimizing your impact as business. Those would be fundamental, and I hope, especially from your field of expertise, these policies will become real soon.
Well, that's a great question because in my experience, some industrial actors would not want their leading practices to be codified in law and regulatory frameworks, and because they think it would erode their competitive advantage. But what do we think about that in the panel? Should governments be legislating and regulating for the best actors, or should they be trying to establish a higher floor to capture as many as possible?
I don't know.
I love honest answers on panels.
I mean, sometimes, depends. I think that regulators or governments really play a role how in the interest of society. I think really to push all sectors to do better, but in reasonable terms.
Right.
Well, why I was a little bit thinking, because it's easy to put sometimes a target, and I've seen that in space of packaging, and then you get unrealistic deadline, completely ignorant of how it can happen, and then you see over time, they say, okay, we didn't think about that, So I fully personally support that there has to be someone who really has to have an oversight and say, hey, listen, we simply have to improve the well-being of society as a whole. And that's why you guys should, do better. So I really welcome that. Just that there is a sensible way and doing this together instead of then coming and knocking on the door to try to prove with facts that, yes, we can get there, but please take into account this and this, let's work together.
Right.
And also, not to be negative, but I do see that there is more openness to have that joint conversation and work together.
Right, because the biggest, most legitimate complaint I've heard as a policymaker over the years from industry is, well, you just don't understand my business. And the reflex from policymakers is to point to the Holcims or the Coca-Cola bottling companies of the world and say, well, they're doing it, why can't you?
No, but I was thinking, and then Zoran took the ball, and I could reflect a little longer. I'm not sure if it's Gerald an either or. I think in some really having innovative technologies where are many, but for water we still have some gaps where we have to go. I think I would be very aggressive in putting incentives with strengthening. I talk from Europe now, openness for venture capital and all those things, and then I would more prefer to go for the floor. But I think in Europe, at least with the waste water treatment regulation you have, or the national water plans in France and in Germany, things are moving and just come from an industry perspective to be really leading edge with technologies fitting desalination in some region and all those things. It can be a competitive factor, and then if we bundle with the enormous amounts of investment capital available, let's say with some interest rate backings from development banks and whatever, I think with limited resources you can also develop some markets, let's say, where it's really people are depending on that. And I think that could be, I'm a little in the positive motivational side here, but let's put the topic on the agenda of 2 out of the next 5 COPs, whatever, because water is, that is, if it's true what I said, that 70% of the implications of climate change are visible via water. So drought means people dying, and having a bad drinking water quality means people getting sick. So it's pretty fundamental things, and so I at least believe in that. Really closing the technology gaps, scaling up technologies, setting the floor in more and more countries, and deliberating investment power that should work is how I believe it should go. So it's not an either or.
Mustika, which approach serves the people of rural Indonesia best?
So I think I agree with the innovative technologies, but I think we cannot take the urban solutions, go directly to the rural solutions, right? Because a bit of story. So we built our largest pump in Tafuli village, and then when the water first delivered, the chief said, since our ancestors, we never dreamed that the water will come to this village, but we fight for it, and today it's a reality, right? So the word we fight for it is really important in the community-based solution. So what I want to emphasize here, it's not only about innovative technologies, but how do we involve the community? So in our community, the community also contribute to 50% of the project costs, and the 50% is from private fundings. And then to maintain the system, it's from the community fund that they need to pay monthly. So this creates sense of belonging of the people, right? And second one is community involvement with their local wisdom. We involve them in design, engineering, monitoring, even monitoring, right? Why? Because they are the one that live there and know 100 years of historical data there, right? So we walk with the village to understand where is the pipe going to be, where is the water source that we're gonna use. So we give them power to decide what water systems that they wanna build, right? So I think we normally see communities that we work with as the beneficiaries, and I don't think it's right, because we should see them as a problem. We should see them as partners, right? Because people who are closest to the problem, I believe, are the closest to the solutions, not people that's living in Manhattan, sitting nicely there, not even me sitting here in St. Gallen. Yeah. So yeah, I believe a community approach much more than the technology innovation
Durability.
in the rural communities.
Yeah. So I think we are at the moment where I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions. It's a young person at the back there with a microphone, right up front. It'll make you walk all the way to the front.
Thank you. Okay. I would just like to thank you for the really insightful panel. My name is Zoran Bogdanović, and I'm currently studying sustainable resource management at the Technical University of Munich. And my question is really directed to all of the panelists, or any of the panelists. When we talk about making industry more sustainable, we often talk about reducing the carbon footprint, but I think we don't talk about as often about reducing the water footprint. So how many liters per water it takes to produce a unit of really anything. So my question is to the panelists, in your work, have you already observed that there are certain industries which are moving towards reducing their water footprint and in their production practices? And to what extent do you think that's actually doable in the short term and also in the long term? Thank you.
150 liters in each of the cubic meters in that concrete. I mean, from our end, water is an important aspect, and if you want to manage it, you need to measure it. And once you start measuring it and pricing it, even if there is not a kind of a formal price on it, you could shadow prices. You could play with a number of impact evaluation factors. It starts making sense. Linked to the compensation, brings to the different level of attention. But in a nutshell, what we see, at least in the construction and the building material sector, is it matters. It started to be costly. You have operations perhaps also linked to the climate change and this ecosystem of physical risk, climate risk, water streams that are basically too low for us to move materials, so we cannot operate. So water is, eventually. This first mover that was mentioning, when you start looking at figures, see water consumption per cement, tons of cement produced or cubic meter produced, the beginning, there's no reference, but once 1, 2, 3, 4 players starting to disclose, you can actually benchmark. There's a bit of an efficiency sense. And that's what I believe everyone has to go for, right? Quantification, it's definitely important. I don't know if that answered the question, but at least you have a number.
Stefan?
I'd say, more companies are feeling the pressure in dimension of water than perhaps is publicly debated. So you have in power generation just breaks in being able to produce because there is not sufficient water in the river. You have in some production sites shortages of water where you can compensate for 1 or 2 days, but then you're shut down. And water, so as said, it gets a strategic topic. I think it would help to combine with regulation. You have in the richer countries the water quality thing. What's really the way out for, let's say, where you have no water infrastructure and whatever is then I think a partially different topic. But it puts on the agenda itself, also in agriculture, as I said. And then the question is how you give incentives and how you give also a certain regulation. I'm normally, as a consultant, not a fan of regulating everything, and we are sometimes at the limits of doing there, but I think in a smart regulation in the water sector would make sense to enlarge further. Yeah.
Great. Question over here. I know who you are, but just tell everybody.
Thank you. My name is Benedict Wexler. I'm a Swiss diplomat ambassador for digital foreign policy. And you wonder why I ask a question. We were looking for where we can use new technologies, AI, digital technologies, for better achieving sustainable development goals. And we identified health and water as two areas where we think really technology and AI and new methods can really help. There's, for instance, the Geneva Water Hub, where we bring together major actors in the UN and scientists, and of course also initiatives like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I think they can really play a vital role. Now, my question is a little bit, we're at the business school here, and I remember the first woman getting the Nobel Prize for Economy made her work on, how do you deal with water in the Alps, the farms. And they had a very specific governance format, which was sort of a mixture between private property rights and common property. And I'm wondering, oh, sorry. And, I was wondering, don't we need also to change the system? Because the trick is also, and that's politics, because most of the water issues are extremely geopolitical. We've been to Central Asia. When you go there, water is the subject of the president or prime minister, because it's, or, go to Africa or California as well. It's highly political. So, and it's always trans-border. So I think this is, I'm wondering, don't we need to sort of fix also the whole framework? And change also some of the property rights, because sometimes water is also too cheap, because that's why you didn't take care of spilling water. So maybe your thoughts on this, do we need to change some of the governance system, and maybe also thinking some new ways of, is the classical liberal economic system fit for solving this water scarcity issue? Thank you.
Always get the toughest questions from the audiences. What do we think? I had this wise old mentor at WWF who used to say that when the water gets lower in the forest, all the animals look at each other a little differently. And I think that's kind of the point, if you let it get to that.
I'll start. I think that I don't think that there has to be change so that there is one model. I can see where private ownership with the necessary and high-level discipline partnerships can really work well. I know a good number of examples where private and public partnerships are working really well. And lastly, for someone who has a local water ownership like we have Walser in Switzerland, you get concession from the state. And in a number of cases, state actually has certain conditions of monitoring how that is used, or various replenishment that is connected with those concessions. So I think that it is up to state and regulator to use the opportunity when providing concession that puts some sensible criteria, which will then motivate, and not whoever gets the concession just do whatever.
Right.
So,
any other thoughts on governance?
Yeah, so it's interesting to discuss the point in St. Gallen that perhaps to have a stronger states-oriented system might be superior, but I think to a certain extent you have a point. So there are some cases where water infrastructure was privatized and you didn't take care about what percentage of the water is leaking, what the pollution things are, and so on. Yeah, my thing, I would not give a dogmatic answer. So if you do a clever concession giving, you can fix the points, yeah, and then you can track where the water goes by leaking, and you can punish, and you can build up the control mechanisms that you find out, and you can have a point on water quality coming from Germany that was very hesitant in privatizing. So we partially have the problem that it's all local municipalities. It gets under critical to innovate sometimes. So I think it's not an either or, and I think if you do a smart regulation with really challenging the points that are important, I would say that I wouldn't go for everything private and for everything public, but you can have reasonable private models if you play it right.
I think if there are any British friends in the audience, they'd agree with your assessment.
Yeah, I didn't name the city I was talking about before, but Britain might be a case where something was perhaps a little overdone. Let's see.
Yeah, terms and conditions in the contract.
But German rail also, so it's not.
Of course. Judging by my watch, we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So I'm going to ask the panelists to keep their answers short so we can get more questions. Right up front here.
Hello, thank you for the interesting discussion. I'm Sayaka Sugiyama from University of Tokyo, and I'm currently studying about irrigation management in Sri Lanka, which is an island country closer to India. And I'm currently working with, I'm taking like local approach, and I kind of work with local officials in Sri Lanka and all that. But at the same time, we're kind of starting and working with a Japanese beverage company, helping with like CSR activities. And my question is, like, from researchers' perspective, like, what role would you expect the researchers to play in, particularly solving this issue? Thank you.
Great question.
You have to take it.
I didn't mean to just look over there at you, Antonio, but
You have
I
the
don't know.
pleasure to take it.
To be honest, I don't know, but I think following up a little bit to what we just discussing before, I think it's and I know we said we were not big fan of strong regulations, but I think we also need to apply a little bit of common sense in mega trends. And I'm just reflecting. There's a tagline we always use when we have to present our decarbonization journey in Holcim is concrete is the second worldwide most consumed product after water. So if water is the most consumed element by society, how and we still, I mean, we already see the trends of population growth, scarcity. How is this not yet at the top of the agenda?
the research agenda?
It's so I guess it's. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but this is definitely something that is not about over-regulating, promoting kind of more strict and demands, but there are things that has to be at the top, and definitely water is not something that's going to go away. So businesses, cities, mayors, this requires a bit of a vision.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously everyone still opens. I don't know if this happens to you, but I'm from Murcia, from the south of Spain. I've seen opening the tap and getting no water. This already happens. It's actually quite shocking. I mean, now I live in Switzerland and there's plenty of water every time I open it. But when you don't have it, it makes you think. So
yeah.
So I guess we need to bring it up. Probably simple messages to elaborate, so it doesn't really become such a complex topic to understand. But it's really basic. It's a matter of trends.
Yeah.
We will continue to consume water, and we will continue to run out of water.
Going to try and squeeze a couple in here before we have to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to build on the question that was asked before. How could it be made more attractive for private and institutional investors to invest into water, into building infrastructure, building solutions?
Sorry, to invest behind...
To build water infrastructure for private sector investors. I mean, I can take a shot at that because we do a lot of work with such investors. I think you have to get creative in the kinds of vehicles you invent. Concessionary capital, mixed funds that include IFIs, international financial institutions. I think this connects to the question you were asking about research too. More national research granting bodies need to have water as a high priority. I noticed this happen. I was on the board of my alma mater, McGill, for 5 or 6 years. And every year, this was the period between 2008 and 2013, every year climate became a much more, a bigger topic of focus from the scientific community within the university. And had our national research granting institutions been more vigilant in putting that on the agenda sooner, we would have gotten a lot more innovative research out of Canadian institutions. And I think probably we need to do the same thing with water. I think the challenge is that once we often have a problem where the finance is in one place and the water problems are in the other place. And if you go through the research bodies of any given country, it's not necessarily at the top of their agenda to solve Sri Lanka's problems, right? And I think that's a tragedy of the commons we need to work on.
One comment from my side. So for the financial sector to invest, I think it's partially already there. It's public, so I can talk about it. Veolia was battling with Suez to buy them for quite a period of time, and then everybody said, oh, for Suez it's a pretty shaky future, and they have very reliable private equity investors to scale up, and they go for markets that never were really touched so far. So it's a very interesting story. If you have a look at the multiples for startups in the water sector, they are some of the highest that are there. So I'd say the public incentive question is more for me what to do with places like yours or remote areas, because if you have infrastructure-driven business, it gets more and more difficult the less people there are, and you broader, the further you have to bring the things like an electrification and whatever. And so the investment per inhabitant in some remote areas is much higher than in other ones, where I think you need to develop those sponsoring or interest rate pushing things you can do in the international development banks where recipes exist. So I wouldn't be so negative. So if here we are in St. Gallen, if you want to be a founder for a startup, to find a technology-driven water topic is not the worst idea.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a great note to end on. I'm conscious that we're the only thing standing between you and the beverage of your choice, probably upstairs. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us, and thank you for the intelligent questions from the audience. I hope you learned something. I know I certainly did, and I look forward to seeing you later in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.